Hello, hi everyone, and good evening. This is Anjana. I'm the engagement lead at Wessex Museums, and I want to thank you all for joining us this evening for this really sparkling and lively debate on climate change and whether science can really tackle what we face in the future alone. So Wessex Museums are a partnership of four museums in Dorset and Wiltshire. They are four amazing museums. They are Dorset Museum, Poole Museum, Salisbury Museum and Wiltshire Museum. So if you are anywhere in the area in Dorset and Wiltshire, please do go and pop in and have a look at their fantastic collections. The reason why we would love for you to go and see our wonderful museums is that we have a fantastic exhibition being launched very shortly called My World, My Future. And it's an exhibition that's been curated with the voices of children and young people in mind. It's going to be on our website, wessexmuseums.org, but you can certainly go and have a look at other objects and collections in the museums that kind of reference the impacts of climate change. Our online talks are free, but any donation you can make to our programming helps us enormously. Museums are amazing spaces where you can learn about history and heritage. They are amazing spaces where you can be inspired and connect with heritage and history, and they add value to people's lives. If you go to wessexmuseums.org.uk/donation, you can donate to our talks program. During the debate, you can post your questions in the comments below, and we'll try and keep track of them as we go through. Yeah, the event is being recorded, and it should appear on a YouTube channel very soon, whether that's SOS or Wessex Museums. We'll let you know how that works out. I'm joined this evening, by three amazing speakers, and I'm going to ask for them to go round in turn to introduce themselves. Emma, should we start with you?
Great, thank you so much, Anjana. So, hi everyone. I am a project manager for SOS-UK, that's Students Organising for Sustainability. I work with staff and students on a variety of sustainability projects, including Green Impact, Student Switch Off, and Homes Fit for Study. Some of you might know about them already. I also lead in our social media work as well. My background is in geography, so I studied geography at Royal Holloway, University of London, which is really where I became passionate about climate justice and where I started volunteering with the UK Youth Climate Coalition. I actually went to Paris with them for COP21, which is very exciting. And I also worked for a local authority in the waste department, and then worked in community engagement, and then went on to study a master's in migration and mobility studies at the University of Bristol, which is where I'm based now. And I specialise in climate-induced displacement in the UK, which is what I'm really passionate about. But yeah, it's lovely to be here this evening.
Oh, thanks, Emma. I think for anybody who's out there who's perhaps doing a degree in geography or environmental sciences, that was like the great resume that you want to have when you do finish your degree. So thank you ever so much for that. Crystal, we're going to start, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Yeah, if I can get off mute there. Yeah, hi, my name's Crystal Moore. I'm a climate scientist and I work for the Environment Agency, but I have lots of outside interests as well as what I do for the Environment Agency. I'm also a director of a fuel poverty charity, and I'm developing my own wind farm just as a side project. So I'm 30 years a climate scientist, and I have a first degree in environmental science, a PhD in environmental toxicology, and I've worked in various different settings, consultancy, charitable sectors, and I settled in the Environment Agency nearly 20 years ago now, doing various different things, but I've also been seconded out and done lots of other things as well. So my passion is climate science. I've had 30 years of understanding the science. The need to act is now. There's no debate around that anymore, I don't think. And I just think engaging as many voices in the discussion is how we make progress. And certainly as a scientist, when I see the most spectacular progress being made, it's when we act together like we did on COVID. And I might talk about that a bit more later, because one of the great privileges of my career was to go and work for Sir Patrick Vallance on COVID-19. Thank you.
Oh, thanks, Crystal. That sounds amazing. Again, another great CV for anybody out there who is kind of doing a degree in, you know, political sciences or environmental sciences. It's just, we are honoured to have you with us tonight, Crystal. Thank you so much. Joe, I'm going to hand over to you because I'm a little bit jealous of your kind of like climate emergency tiara. It looks pretty good.
Thank you. Yeah, it's great to be here. So I'm Joe. I'm 19. I studied politics at University of Sheffield. I've been involved in climate stuff for a few years now. I think it all started when I went to my first climate protest back in beginning of 2019. So over 3 years ago now, which is a bit mental. A lot has changed since then. I got involved with that. Worked to organise the climate strikes here in the UK on a national level. I've represented the UK in meetings with climate activists across the world. I started a campaign called Teach the Future, which is focused around improving climate education here in the UK. And I've had the opportunity to meet with lots of scientists and politicians and various other interesting people. My biggest flex is that I once had a chat with David Attenborough, which is a pretty awesome one. But yeah, that's me. At the moment, I'm at university, but last year I worked during my gap year with SOS-UK.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thanks, Joe. You know, we're all really jealous about the little name drop there. So yeah, David Attenborough, name check. Nice one, nice one. We're all here to talk about the climate emergency. And, you know, the question that I want to pose to you, the provocation is can science alone help to tackle climate change? And I want you to just have a think about that for a minute and just to kind of prime you and prime the folks watching this. By background, I'm an earth scientist, so I'm someone that studies rocks, fossils and landforms, as well as also being the engagement lead at Wessex Museums. I am literally obsessed with rocks. And I wanted to just put you in the frame of mind of the type of science we're talking about, climate science, because I'm going to show you two fossils actually, both collected on the Dorset coast. This is, and hopefully you can see this, the contrast isn't so great. Let me just cover up my light there. This is a piece of chalk, and there's a cast of a bivalve in there. And if I told you that chalk falls on the bottom of beautiful turquoise blue, you know, tropical seas, you're thinking of very nice, warm, sandy beaches, turquoise water to scuba dive in. Well, actually, Dorset was like that 140 million years ago. It was like the Bahamas. And I have another fossil in terms of showing you the evidence for that. So this is a sea urchin. And again, that was found just off somewhere on the Weymouth coast. So 140 million years ago, Dorset was like the Bahamas. And, you know, it was tropical temperatures. And when we talk about climate change, natural climate change, you know, we're talking of tens of millions of years of time passing for climate to change, for environments and species to adapt, and for that to manifest itself in the geological record. So the question I pose to you is, climate change, obviously, we can see there's natural variability in patterns of climate change. What we're facing now is very, very different. Over the last 150 years, we've seen a huge rise in carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere and subsequently temperature rise. Now, there is obviously, Crystal, you can tell us more about the science behind that, but what I'd like to know from you, from all three of you, is the science enough to help us understand how we can tackle this huge global issue, this emergency that we face? Crystal, can we start with you so you can give us a little bit, for those of the audience out there who aren't too sure about the science behind it, maybe you could just give us a little bit of that.
Yeah, sure. So I started as a climate scientist, or as a scientist, in what was AstraZeneca, or ICI at the time, Environment Function. And as I was leaving, there was a talk given, so this was a long time ago now, that it was titled Climate Change, Tree Hugging Hippie Hype or the End of the World. And it used Albert Durer's Four Horse Riders of the Apocalypse to describe, you know, what the possible futures were. And at that time, it was still in debate, which in the current time, that seems incredible that, you know, in my lifetime as a scientist, my boss was emphatically, no, it's natural variation. we're worrying about, you know, things that are not anything exceptional. However, in the last, for 7 years, I was the director for flood forecasting in the Environment Agency, and what I saw there was genuinely eye-watering with the current climate, let alone 1.5 degrees, 2 degrees on top. We did something called ensemble forecasting, where we look at a full range of possibilities with the climate that we have. And obviously you're not always going to get the most extreme case manifest. Sometimes it does, but you're seeing the whole field of view, not just a single what might go out on the BBC weather forecast. So having that hidden view of what happens or what is possible now, let alone what is possible in the future, it is genuinely terrifying to see. So I say I want people to be shaken and stirred. I want to give them the hidden views that I have of climate change so that they're stirred into action, because action is needed and it's needed urgently. So when I was preparing for this, I don't know if you want me to continue with the kind of thought stream that I had around the provocation. There was 4 elements that I thought about. So the first was science per se, physical science. And you know, I'm a physical scientist. I've done deep modelling, I've done lots of resilience and risk assessments, etc. And physical science definitely has something to offer in the solution side. And my best illustration of that is working for Sir Patrick Vallance on SAGE and helping to run that. So there was a phenomenal number of scientists involved with that. And it was the intersections that made us make better informed, evidence-based decisions, made us pursue the right kind of outcome. And it's those intersections and recombinations where the fascinating stuff happens. I ran flood forecasting. It was a combination between the Environment Agency and the Met Office. If the Environment Agency had continued doing what it was doing, we would have been marginally better. By recombining with the Met Office's skills, we came transformationally better. And to illustrate that, when I started running the service, a good warning was 2 hours lead time, 2 hours. You know, that gives you enough time to get your stuff upstairs, if you're lucky, if you believe the warning. By the time I left 7 years later, we had a product that gave 30 days lead time. And that wouldn't have happened unless we'd recombined the science. And that's exactly what we got in SAGE. And it, you know, a huge privilege, massive career highlight to look at that. But the thing with working on that scale is that you do not get consensus. You know, you get, well, you don't get unanimous consensus, and we should never strive for that. So consensus is something that we should look for, that helps us to guide us to make decisions making forward, stop us from going round and round and round. But we should always make that progress based on the best evidence at that time and what the fine minds are telling us, because we've got so many fine minds. And if you are listening and you're a science student, you've made a wise choice. Now is the time of the scientist. Absolutely. The second point that I wanted to make, and I've got 4 points, is about behavioural science and the contribution of behavioural science to progress. Science per se needs to be understood, and comprehension of science is a passion of mine. I'm going to name drop like Joe, but when I was doing my PhD, I shared a stage twice with David Bellamy, and he was a fantastic communicator, an amazing communicator. And that's what we need, people that can make the science comprehensible, because it shouldn't be an ivory tower that only people like myself understand. We need to make it accessible, and we need to challenge ourselves to do that. So my question often for my fellow scientists is, what do we already know that we're not facing towards? Because often there is a truth, a deeper truth that we know, but for various reasons, political might be, Joe will fill us in on politics, but that is why we don't face towards it, but we already know it, and we can sense that in the field. Science is a combination of things. It's not just the empirical evidence, it's other things that I sense whispering in the data, and I can tell lots of stories about that kind of stuff. So my third point is about power and exercising power, because comprehension and knowledge is nothing if it's not executed. And I think, you know, we've got enormous power that sometimes we don't face towards as well. So we have power as consumers, we have powers as voters. Use your vote. Don't ever waste a vote. Use it. Use it. And power, whether we do things over or with. So as an activist, do you seek to bring solutions to the table, or do you just throw stones at what we've already got? It's much more powerful if the solutions are brought, because you can rest assured anybody dealing with an emergency, and that is my role now, has very limited time to consider lots of different options, because the cost of inaction is high. So come with solutions and you'll be welcomed at the table, because that open-mindedness to how we can do things differently is very much where it's at. And I see myself as a facilitator of the right conversations. Often, if I'm asked a question by government, I might say, that's not the right question to be asking. A better question would be. And the way that you then approach that, it can be quite transformational about what gets pursued. And then my final one is about the will to play a long game. You know, I was thinking about this in the context of my garden, and behind me I have an Aldi set of bulbs there, probably 2.49 this week at Aldi. And if I'm only concerned about caring for those bulbs whilst they're in my conservatory here, my actions will be very different to if they become part of my garden. And we're all gardeners, you know, we're all locked into what is the cathedral project of our age. And it is a cathedral project. You know, we'll lay the foundations, others will hoist the tower. And that is what we need to think about. So the focus needs to shift from us as individuals and the choices that we might make to us being part of the frame. And, you know, let's have a debate about investment, but not when's the right time to invest, which generation bears the cost of investment. It's those kind of things that are a much more intelligent way of tackling. And that's what you are all being trained to do, ask intelligent questions. And those intelligent questions forge a way forward. So those are my four thoughts in response to the question.
Oh, thanks, Crystal. There is so much to take away from that and so much to discuss. So there's a couple of points I've noted that I'm going to just bring out in as we move through this debate. Joe, can we go to you next? Because I have a feeling that you're champing at the bit to have your voice heard on this, especially after things that Crystal.
Yeah. Well, I guess I'm surrounded by scientists right now, so I feel a bit like I'm in dangerous waters here. But my answer is absolutely not. Science alone can't help us tackle a climate emergency. Science is important, but we need much more. I think as I said earlier, I started the campaign called Teach the Future, which is focused around improving climate education in the UK. And one of our key demands was that climate change not be taught just in science, because the way it is taught currently in schools is that you get basically told that the greenhouse effect exists, and you get told that the planet is heating up, and that's pretty much it. And what it fails to do is explain the kind of human and societal consequences of that. And that's something, you know, I think obviously science can do, but it can't always help us understand it in a way that works for all of us. I think maybe for scientists, the stats and the graphs work well, but for a lot of us, that really isn't enough. And that was one of the reasons we really wanted to see change there. But I mean, I've always been a bit of an environmentalist. You know, it's always been something I've been into, and that led me down the route of being really into science at sixth form and stuff. I did science A levels, and I applied for a degree in biology. I had a place for a biology degree at Sheffield, but over the last 2 years, between when I made that decision and when I got here, I decided to change my degree, because what I discovered over those 2 years is that, you know, there are loads of scientists who know an incredible amount about climate change, you know, to a surprisingly high degree of accuracy. That we have, you know, incredible technological developments on solar power and wind and all those areas, but we're still not much closer to tackling the climate emergency than we were before those developments. And, you know, like, I'm constantly asking the question, why? You know, why hasn't progress been made? And what I realized is that the biggest barriers weren't in science, but they're instead in our political systems. I think a great example is that Crystal has start a wind farm. I'm pretty sure it takes many years to get a wind farm going, and I don't think the barriers to that are scientific. I think they're about planning permission, right? I mean, maybe you can nod your head if that's right. Yeah. I think I've read that it takes about an average like 8 years to get a wind farm going, and the reason for that is not because the science of wind turbines take 8 years to develop, but it's because of the planning permission and the technicalities, and that's the same reason that onshore wind was effectively, impossible over the last few years. It's the same reason why, we've seen really, much slower renewable developments in the UK than we should have. It's because of political barriers, not technological and scientific barriers. So what I've increasingly realized is that those are our biggest problems. And I remember, I've gone to a lot of climate protests, and one of the most common placards I see is trust the science or follow the science. And I think it's a really interesting one because obviously I agree, we should trust this science, and to a degree we should follow the science, but I don't think that science, this kind of great intelligent thing that can do everything, I don't think science can actually tell us the exact steps we need to take. It can tell us, what products use, emit, have, huge carbon emissions in their lifespans, but it can't tell us who needs to be bearing the costs of net zero. It can't tell us why it's important that we protect certain people from climate change. It can tell us who is at risk from climate change impacts, but it doesn't kind of give us the kind of moral imperatives to do anything. It also doesn't tell us whether, we should be focusing on, business-led solutions to climate change or government-led solutions to climate change. It can give us advice that really informs the decisions, but ultimately, the big decisions around climate change, the big steps that need to come, in my opinion, is through politics. We've made great scientific progress, but what needs to come now is political change, and that's what's really lagging behind. And that's why I switched from doing a biology, well, one of the many reasons I switched from doing a biology degree to a politics degree, because I started to realize that, yeah, great, I can, help as an ecologist, I can study the way plants are changing, animals are changing. If I want to try and slow down that change rapidly, I decided my best bet was to go through politics and try and campaign to make a difference.
Thanks, Joe. Gosh, that's really interesting to hear about that switch in your thinking at that stage. Emma, at this point, because that's a very nice segue into your point of view on this. Please tell us more.
Thank you, Anjana. And yeah, thanks, Joe. That's really interesting to hear. And I think at SOS would probably lean slightly more towards Joe's perspective there in the terms that I think we all agree that science is completely essential, it's completely necessary, but it's not sufficient. That's the big issue. So it's a multifaceted emergency, the climate emergency. We need everyone on board, and that includes scientists, of course, and it also includes every single one of us. And that means we need to embed sustainability in our education systems from early years all the way through to adult learning. So we agree that we should keep learning even in adult life. And SOS was actually set up by students for students, and we continue to do research with students. And over the past 10 years, the majority have consistently said that they think their institution should be doing more to incorporate sustainable development in their courses, in all courses, including their own ones, and that they'd like to learn more about the issues generally. And that's been consistent across age groups, across disciplines. So there's the demand there from students to learn more about these issues. And we really need to make sure that's embedded throughout existing material and course content. It's not just an added bonus, like Joe was kind of saying there. It's not just something you do in science or do as a one-off module. You want to make sure it's embedded throughout all course content, so it becomes like a golden thread throughout the education system. And yeah, so you basically need all students to be sustainability students. Really, we need everyone. And we actually had recently our SDG teaching. So this is a sort of a few week-long event which aims to embed the Sustainable Development Goals in education. And we had hundreds of pledges, which is really exciting. And those pledges range from graphic design to sports to fashion, construction, architecture, tourism, as well as the classic things you'd expect, you know, geography, environmental science as well. So yeah, it's really exciting to see that actually we're now sort of equipping educators to make sure they can embed that in their courses. And yeah, we completely agree as well in terms of we really need that whole societal shift to solve the climate emergency. And so yeah, science is completely essential as part of that. And to come up with those innovative solutions, we need to also listen to those who have been marginalised and maybe not listened to as much. So this comes from that climate justice perspective that I think Teach the Future was definitely a part of, in terms of listening to not just scientists, but also Indigenous populations and frontline communities who are being really impacted today. And often they've been practicing sustainability in their communities for decades, for generations. And so it's something we can definitely learn from, and yeah, make sure that we include that in our education systems as well, so it's not so Eurocentric and that sort of thing. And there's actually a really great book which I've got here called Pollution is Colonialism, which I'd recommend to anyone to read. It's written by a scientist who's also an Indigenous person, and they have some really interesting perspectives on how to sort of mesh those different knowledges together, and to make sure that we're coming at it from a justice perspective. So yeah, I think just to sum up, I think basically if science could tackle the climate emergency alone, which is kind of the provocation, was about being alone, then I think it probably would have done so already, because it's been clear for decades now that we need to make that change to reduce our use of fossil fuels and switch to a sort of less carbon intense way of living. And I think, yeah, one of those main barriers, like Crystal mentioned earlier, is about communication. That's really what we need, is to make sure that everything can be communicated, as well as I think there are also obstacles put in place by the fossil fuel industry and people who do benefit from the system as it is today, that we need to overcome. So ultimately, of course, we do need science, as well as the arts and vocational studies and all the interdisciplinary work that goes on to tackle everything holistically.
Thanks, Emma. I'm just going to jump in right away, because there's something I'm really picking up on. And you used that word, Crystal, power. And in the work that we do in our museums, we talk about deconstructing the construct of power. And I think, and maybe some of you can kind of just give us a little bit more insight into what happened at COP26, because obviously the scientists had a big stage to talk about the IPCC report and things like that. But the construct of power was such that young people and Indigenous voices were on the outside. So when Joe and Emma are talking about what are the Indigenous communities and the young people asking for? They're asking for a seat at the table. And I would like for perhaps a little bit of focus on this construct of power. How can folks like Joe and SOS move into that space to begin to challenge the scientific community to have their voices heard? Crystal, what advice would you have for them to ensure that they are listened to? So I don't know who wants to kick off first in terms of tackling this big egg, which is a construct of power. Anybody? I don't mind. Joe, go on, you go first.
Right, I was at COP26 with a group called Green New Deal UK. It was a really interesting few days for me, because for my time there, it felt really incredible. I was with an amazing bunch of people. I met people from across the world who travelled to be there for this moment. You know, the protest was huge. I was asked to bring a prop with me. I've got my megaphone as my prop for this, because I am quite a loud protester. I think it was amazing. I felt like we had some amazing solutions that were being discussed. We had these great ideas, this great kind of energy and feeling. It felt like we had a lot of power in the moment then. But then I remember at the end of my second day there, I looked at the news and I was really kind of, I don't want to say disappointed, but I felt there was this really weird disconnect between the energy and the excitement and the drive of us young people outside of COP on the streets of Glasgow, and the people on the inside of this climate conference, the the politicians, the leaders, where action had been happening in an alarmingly slow rate, agreements were difficult to come to, and just not enough was happening. And there was really kind of eerie disconnect, I think, between that, and it made me feel I went from going from feeling very powerful for a minute in the protest, and so many of us, to feeling pretty powerless when I realised how kind of, unfortunately, though that didn't have an impact on that day, or didn't have the impact I wanted it to. So I guess there's obviously a big question there of what can we actually do that makes a difference. But I also think young people have done quite a bit over the last few years that have made a significant difference. If I look back to the climate strikes, I was there when that started. And I mean, before then, climate change was obviously of importance. But if you look at the polling, for example, I mean, over those kind of first few months of 2019, awareness and kind of understanding of climate change and how high people rated that as an issue just massively increased. And we saw political action that followed it, not as much as I wanted by quite a bit, but we saw Parliament declared a climate emergency, for example. We saw the UK become the first country to kind of set legal net zero targets for 2050. And we had meetings with politicians. I think the Prime Minister at the time was Theresa May, maybe. And I know that some of my mates met with her. I've had the opportunity to meet with loads of politicians and stuff, and have my kind of say to them. And I think climate change has become an increasingly kind of election-defining issue, but there's still a lot of barriers. But I guess what I want to say is that when we go to these protests, sometimes it can feel like we have absolutely no power, and other times we actually can, maybe not as much progress as we want, but we really can make some progress. As young people and people kind of protesting on the streets. So yeah, that was my perspective.
I just want to bring, before I go to Crystal, I just want to hear from Emma, actually, just so we get that full view of young people and how you view the construct of power, and whether scientists or science kind of owns that. Just over to you, Emma.
Thanks, Anjana. Yeah, I think an interesting one on this is that I wasn't at COP, but I worked on a project called Mock COP, which was trying to get young people involved, and actually it was set up by young people when the COP was actually postponed. So they set up their own online version of COP, and they did an amazing job of having it all online, all accessible, all in different languages, and they actually came up with a sort of official document at the end where they all agreed upon some policies that could be implemented by governments around the world. So that was really exciting to see. And then a lot of those people, we managed to get a few of those people funded to come to the actual COP itself, to meet in person and to sort of lobby the governments when they're actually there. And I think there were quite a few issues in terms of the accessibility of that, the fact that it is in the UK there was different issues with visas. There were so many obstacles in the way that were just sort of put in place politically, and obviously there was COVID at the time as well, which obviously didn't help as well in terms of complicating issues. But I think one thing that would help in terms of connecting the issues is just to ensure that climate justice is really at the heart of everything moving forward. So I think there is definitely a shift towards that in sort of the discourse and discussions around this topic. And I've seen that a lot of the sort of leading people involved in the COP, a lot of the scientists are really sort of leaning more heavily on that term and using that term more often. But another book recommendation here, just because that's my main props are just books. It's Climate Justice by Mary Robinson, who was the former president of Ireland and is a UN elder, and she wrote this really, really interesting book which highlights some of the potential solutions that are in place from existing communities around the world, which is just a really exciting thing to see. And I think having that as being recognised more by the leaders and by those who are sort of running these events is really, really important to make sure that youth voice is able to be heard and sort of recognised.
Crystal, just if you could have a minute just to respond to that, I'd be really interested in your views, and particularly I think for for the SOS kind of crowd that are watching, in particular, or young people that are watching, you know, you specifically said, you know, when you talked about come with solutions, what can you just elaborate on that just for a moment?
Yeah, power dynamics totally fascinate me because there's power asymmetries everywhere, and most people don't realize the power that they have, and they give it up too easily. So my plea to vote, everybody should vote. Typically, what it takes to shift power to another party is 3%. 3%, you know, that is it. So one of the challenges of politics is that what makes politicians electable doesn't make them good governors. So they're elected on an issue, typically, you know, I'm going to go for Brexit or whatever. Contemporary politics has been focused around. But once they come into power, then their job is to represent everybody, not just their party or their backbenchers. And that's where we must hold them all to account. We get the politicians we elect. So if you're impassive and you sit down and you don't go out and vote, you've made a choice. You've given away your power. And that is just something that I implore everybody. As a female scientist, you know, women had to fight for the vote, and we live in a man's world. There's so many things that I experience. As a female scientist, I'm often the only female in the room with the decision makers. And I often hold a hell of a lot of power because I know the forecast. I know what they need to react to, and I need to tell them that so that they can come up with a rational response. And similarly, with your votes, you tell politicians what you want. And that's what we must do, is exercise our votes. When Joe was talking, I was thinking about protests, and protests happen when people don't feel heard. Greta started a movement through a protest because one person is never too small to make a difference. One person can make a movement. And when I look at the amazing scientists that have shaped my career, both known and unknown, they've all created movement in me to orientate towards a mission. You know, my mission is climate resilience. I'm really, really clear on that. And I will do everything I can from my positions of power, whether it's in the committee room at Cobra, briefing the ministers on what's coming with the flood, or whether it is actually choosing not to go to COP26 and to go and work with my community interest company instead. I had a paper there, and it was a shared paper, so very much recombining sciences. But I chose not to go because I didn't think that's where change was going to happen. Change is happening locally. Change is happening where you make it be the change. You know, that is a key message, because the choices that you make every day shape the future that we all inherit. You know, an inconvenient truth was one of the things that kind of shaped the journey for people's consciousness around climate change, and Al Gore getting behind that. He is remarkable, absolutely remarkable. Everyone who's listening to this has the chance to do something equally remarkable. It's all about spheres of influence, and it is all about using the power that you have wisely, acknowledging the power that you have. And particularly, again, I'm going to talk particularly to women, don't face away from your power. Because we live in a male construct, lots of women think of power very negatively. I was in a meeting last week talking about power, and you know, we were asked to put a single word in about power into the chat. You know, what we felt about power. I coach lots of people who have issues with power, but my word was distributed, because in the time of the internet, power is distributed massively compared to how it was concentrated in the past. And we're seeing a shift in society where somebody with a phone is a reporter. You know, what's happening in Ukraine, we wouldn't know the kind of things that we know about it now if there wasn't that distributed power of the internet and the ability to look at issues in different ways. And the other thing, just last was Barack Obama's first book, Dreams from My Father. He writes really passionately in the start of it about how challenging it was to find an issue that the community would get behind and vote for him for. And, you know, we don't have that issue anymore. I've got a WhatsApp group for my street. I know loads of people, you know, that I never knew before locally here because of COVID. And, you know, it really has changed the paradigm. And we must all step into our power. That would be my main thing.
Joe, Emma, any response to that? Do you want to come back?
Yeah, I can come back first, and then maybe Joe can jump in. Yeah, I think that was really interesting, Chris, actually what you said about sort of democratizing power. That's one of the things that we talk about in some of our workshops. We talk about democratizing, decolonizing, and decarbonizing, and how they need to work together to actually create a sustainable future. And the fact that it kind of does come back to power, like you were saying, you know, they're all connected by that, and we need to sort of tackle the roots of that in order to really get to the sort of the solutions that are going to be the most just for the most people. So I think they really are really connected, and I'm really hopeful that we are in a more democratized world, and we can become more sort of continue with decolonizing education and decolonizing our minds, as well as decarbonizing as well. And I just wanted to jump in as well and comment on, you mentioned the documentary there, and I was just thinking about how Don't Look Up might be the next sort of thing that is something that a lot of us might have watched. It's on Netflix. It's meant to be an analogy for climate change. It's not perfect by any means, of course. It's a one-off comet event, and there's lots of things you can say about that in terms of how it doesn't represent inequalities and how that would affect the climate crisis. But disregarding that for the moment, I think it did show, interestingly, how scientists, like the role of the scientists is really important, right? They're the ones that first of all see the comet. They're the ones that can potentially sort of do something about it, but they're not listened to. And so I think that's just a really interesting point, potentially, about how we can think of the role of science in this, and how society sees the role of science as well.
Joe, probably you want to come back and say something, so I'm going to just give you a bit of time to come in here.
Sure, there's so much I want to say. I genuinely can't choose where to start with this, but I'm just going to go back to the original prompt, I think, and kind of, you know, can science alone help us solve climate change? I've already said I don't think so. We need a lot of politics, and I was just thinking in some of the ways that we might, in which politics is really where we find the solutions to climate change, or we need to force the solutions to climate change. And it made me think of something that one of the kind of key discoveries, or maybe realizations, I came to over my last few years doing climate activism, and that is that personal lifestyle changes really aren't enough around climate change. I remember when I first got involved, obviously I went to protest because I thought the government needed to be doing more. But mostly, I thought people needed to be doing more. I was trying to raise awareness so that people could do more. I knew that if we, I don't know, recycled more or eat less meat, those kind of things, I knew those could reduce our emissions if we to public transport. And I kind of thought, oh, okay, great, these are the things we need to be arguing for. You know, people's make these changes. And what I realized as I tried to start doing those things myself, and as I talked to other people who've been trying to do those things, is there are huge systemic barriers to a lot of those changes. You know, it's easy to say you should make an amazing, healthy, protein-filled vegan meal every day, but it's a lot harder if you're, a mum with 3 kids who works a full-time job, and you get home tired. You're just not going to have a chance to make, you know, some amazing kind of vegan meal that fits all the food groups. It might just be easier in that case to kind of grab a microwave meal. I mean, and then suddenly that's, you know, one barrier there. Public transport is a great example, because I really thought, oh, everyone's just stop using their cars. But then I very quickly realised that, I mean, I live in Devizes in Wiltshire. Public transport there is utterly shit. I mean, I have to spend quite a lot of money and wait quite a while to get a bus, and there's no train station, there's nothing like that. It's awful. And I very soon realised that on pretty much all of these issues, the biggest barriers are still systemic issues that can be changed through politics. And I think that's made me realise that the biggest power we have as individuals, and something, you know, people always ask me, what should I do about climate change? And I think they always expect me to say something like, drive your car less, or, you know, plant some trees. They always expect me to say something like that. Particularly because people I talk to is often older adults, people in kind of towns like where I live who maybe aren't that tuned into the politics of climate change, and they always expect an answer like that. And the instant thing I say is get political. You know, get political, write to your MP, get on the streets, do as much as you possibly can to raise a fuss about this, because the biggest barriers and the biggest solutions to climate change are in politics. And we need to make sure those solutions are ones that are, as Emma's pointed out, just. You know, we need solutions that don't kind of put those who are vulnerable, already in positions of lack of privilege. We need solutions that help raise those people up, not push them down further. You know, we need to make sure those that can carry the greatest burden do when it comes to the costs of climate change. And I think that's kind of one of the big realizations I've made over the few years from being a climate activist. I probably would have first said, if someone asked what the best thing you could do, I probably would have said go vegetarian. Now I would definitely say get political.
So Joe, just on the back of that, we had a question from Hannah that came in, and she wanted to know what was the most significant thing that you learned from going to COP26, just staying in that kind of thread of politics.
The biggest thing I learned was that it's really hard to sleep on an overnight coach between Sheffield and Glasgow. Also, that Glasgow is very cold, but I think on a more important message, I think I was just absolutely amazed by how many solutions there were to climate change coming from young people. That was a really big realization for me. Something that really shocked me, or I guess it was a bit eye-opening for me, in how able politicians are to basically lie and to follow vested interests. Was I remember the representative of the EU at COP26. I can't remember the specifics of this, but he made a speech in the negotiating hall, and he called for greater financing for poorer countries around climate change and greater effort from richer countries to decarbonise. And I thought it was quite impressive and good to see. I'm typically quite sceptical of kind of the EU climate policy. I think it's a bit shit. And I was really happy to see that, and I thought it's good that the richer nations are stepping up and taking some of their responsibility on climate change. But then later that day, in the news, it came out that in the kind of backroom negotiations, he'd been essentially arguing for the exact opposite. He'd been pushing for less responsibility for the richer nations and less climate finance for the poorer nations. And it made me realise how much of politics can be a farce, how much of it can be, I've shaken the hands of a lot of politicians who have probably left that meeting and absolutely forgotten everything that they've agreed to. They haven't carried it out. I've had a lot of promises from politicians that have just been kind of completely forgotten. I mean, I've been quite involved in Labour Party politics over the last few years, and I've met with the last few Labour leaders. I remember hearing some promises from Keir Starmer, the current Labour leader, which I just don't think he's stuck by. So I guess one of the kind of saddening realizations is that politicians can lie, or they can kind of reprioritize, they can mislead, and I guess that's a bit of a shocking one, but also that we can keep up the pressure, and there's this constant need to keep up pressure. Don't just kind of take the first level of, if we suddenly stopped doing any climate activism the minute the government decides to make a net zero pledge or Parliament declared a climate emergency, then I think we'd be in a pretty difficult situation. We'd be in much worse off than we are now. So I guess maybe the thing from that was just like keep up pressure. Don't maybe give up when you think you've got your first victory, or stop there. But also do celebrate the victories you've made. That's important. But
So we've got about 10 minutes left, and I just want to pose one final question to you. I'm from Wessex Museums. I'm the engagement lead, and as part of our My World, My Future project, we worked with quite a large number of children and young people across Dorset and Wiltshire to really understand how they felt about climate change. And these were young people from all sorts of different backgrounds. And it was our community curators led on this work, and they were utterly brilliant at kind of moving into those groups of young people, listening to their voices and empowering them in order to capture what they wanted to say. And as museums, we have a unique role because we sit in a space where we can allow these young people, you know, give them the space to express their views and opinions, which I think is just vital. Museums play a vital role in that, and we can see that with the kind of conversations around decolonisation and you know, Black Lives Matter and all sorts of other critical issues in society today. Just as we're moving into the last couple of minutes of this IGTV Live, I wondered what your thoughts were on kind of, as we move this conversation forward, you know, we know that political voice, that deconstructing the construct of power is a really vital aspect of beginning to look at how we can supplement the role of science in tackling climate change. I'm wondering what your kind of take on perhaps the role of museums is. Does it have a role at all? Do museums have a role to play in that? How do we begin to move into that space of beginning to have young voices heard in this arena? Crystal, can I just kind of start with you, and then we'll go to Emma and then end with Joe.
You're muted.
Yeah, as the oldest voice on the panel, I'm not sure I'm qualified. However, curation is really, really important. And curation creates the dominant narrative, and that is power as well. So if you look at, I think Bristol has really elegantly navigated its past and is reinventing what the story is there compared to what might have been the dominant narrative. I was in Bristol last week, and there's a lovely exhibition in the library there about protest and how that shaped the city. And there was lots of things catching my eye as I walked back to the station. So there's a phoenix statue that's in front of one of the places that burned down, and there's women around that in various different facets. And I think, you know, our ability to see beyond what is of interest to us personally, kind of going back to my point about we're not looking after the bulbs, we're looking after the garden. And I think anything that curates knowledge has a really, really important and powerful role to play in that. So I'm always keen to try and be as inclusive as possible, to make sure everything has a voice, including nature has a voice with a lot of the stuff that I do. So I can point to a record and show how things have changed empirically with data. But I need to find a way to get people to listen to what is the story that this data is telling. Kind of way of thinking. You know, institutions aren't what they used to be, are they? You know, when I went to university, you went to a library. Now you log online and you do your research and you understand the world in a very different way to what my experience of it was. So I think being really conscious of the power of creating the dominant narrative, curating gracefully to inclusively hold lots of stuff. And I'm sure Emma will have something to say around the transition element of that, because the transition needs to be handled in a careful way as well, because the power is shifting. Thank you.
Emma, do you just want to come in?
Yes, I'll keep it brief, but I think, yeah, museums have a really, really important role in climate education. We actually work with quite a few museums ourselves at SOS. We have a program called Green Impact, where we sort of really use that to sort of have organisational cultural shifts within that organisation, which we've worked with the Natural History Museum on that, which is really exciting, and definitely would be open to working with other museums. We worked with Kew Gardens as well recently, which is kind of similar in that sense, as well as sort of doing carbon literacy training as well with the staff of the museum, so that it's kind of embedded throughout the organisation, not just curators, but the whole organisation is very conscious of that. And yeah, like I say, I think museums have a really great role in terms of providing climate education for everyone. Like, that access to all is really, really important. So yeah, I think it sounds like a really exciting exhibition, which yeah, I'm sure I'll come to visit at some point when it's open.
Thank you so much. Actually, our exhibition is going to be online, so you can look at it from the comfort of your computer. Joe, just a final word from you, and then we'll wrap up.
Yeah, I'm going to go a bit broader and just say education is really important when it comes to climate change. Particularly for us young people, we need to be equipped, prepared to face the effects of climate change in our lives, but also to kind of contribute to the solutions, you know, so we can be prepared to enter green industries or green existing industries as we leave education. Obviously, a lot needs to come from people that are already out in the workforce and in their jobs, and adults, but for us young people as well. Obviously, climate change is just going to be a huge part of our lives and our futures, and education, and that includes formal education, but also education more broadly has a really important role to play in that.
Well, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. So, as I said, My World, My Future is a digital exhibition that will be on the Wessex Museum's website. If you follow Wessex Museums on Instagram, there will be posts coming out that would let you know when that digital exhibition goes live. That's probably going to be sometime in early April. We also have another event coming up, which is really discussing a takeover day that we did at two of our museums, at Poole Museum and at Dorset Museum, as part of this programme. And that event is on Thursday, the 21st of April, from 7 to 9 p.m. I think it's 7 to 8 p.m. actually from my notes, and it's called Youth Voices for Climate Change, and that is a conversation between a young person who is curating a climate change exhibition at Dorset Museum, our community curator Ernie Pelham at Poole Museum, and there'll be, I can't remember her name, but we do have a programme manager from Kids in Museums joining us at that particular event. So do come and join us at that free webinar to find out more about behind the scenes of how we created that exhibition. Just want to say a huge thanks to all three of you for joining me and Wessex Museums to kind of really kick off our digital exhibition, My World, My Future. I don't know, we've literally got 2 minutes left, so I'm going to give you like a chance to sign off and have your, you know, big take-home message for everybody watching. So, Crystal, let's kick off with you.
Yeah, thank you. Great to have been here. My key message is engage. Use your power, don't give it away, and you can shape the future. Thank you.
Thanks. Emma?
Yeah, thanks everyone. Yeah, reiterate that as well completely. It's within your power to create that change, and do keep on learning even after formal education is completed. I think it's a really, really good point to end on.
Oh, thanks so much, Joe.
Thank you so much for letting me join this. It's been great. I think it's been so interesting being part of the panel with some very different people, yeah, from different backgrounds and expertise and experiences. It's been great. I'll repeat my other message: get political.
Oh, thanks so much. And I'm going to go and run out and get myself a climate emergency tiara after this event. Thank you so much to everybody who stuck with us for the hour, who engaged and asked questions. We have loved having you with us. Thank you, and we'll see you at our next event. Thanks. Bye.